Good morning, everyone, and thank you very much for joining us. Welcome to the OMVIC Disclosure Webinar with our special host today, Bob Pierce, and we're also going to be joined by Farah Mohammed, one of our OMVIC inspectors. Why don't both of you just take a second and tell everyone a little bit about yourselves?
Well, thank you, Terry, and I'm with the Used Car Dealers Association, of course, as Director of Member Services, and I guess this is our second webinar, and I think disclosure is probably, when you take a look at the new regulations from 2010, the biggest, most important change that happened in the regulations. So this is a good thing to be happening right now. Okay.
Yeah, great. Farah?
Okay. I am an inspector with OMVIC. I've been here for approximately since the implementation of the new Motor Vehicle Dealers Act. Prior to me being an inspector, I was a business standards representative, preaching advertising rules and regulations and compliance, and before that, a complaints representative facilitating and mediating consumer complaints. Great organization to work for, great message to get across. Disclosure, very important. Take notes. If you've got questions, please feel free to ask throughout the presentation.
Thanks, Farah. So my name's Terry O'Keefe. I'm the Director of Communications and Education here at OMVIC, and I'm going to be your moderator today. So just before I turn things over to Farah and Bob, I just wanted to point out that if you have a question during the webinar, please, I'm sure you can all see on your screen right now, this little box that's represented. You can type your question in there and send it to us. At the end of the webinar, we're going to try to address as many questions as we can. If by chance, though, we don't get to yours, we will have OMVIC staff from either our inspections, business standards, or complaints and inquiries team respond to your question via email. So, just to give you an idea of some of the things we're going to talk about today, we're going to talk about retail disclosures, wholesale disclosures, what you have to tell fellow dealers about the vehicles that you're selling to them. We're going to talk a little bit about trade-in statements, about rescission. And rescission is the automatic right for a customer to cancel a contract, and that can be triggered for the failure to make specified disclosures. We're also going to talk about some of the administrative actions and penalties that can occur when disclosures aren't provided, and just a very brief summary. So why don't I start things right off and turn it over to Bob.
Well, thanks, Terry. And what I want to start with first is take you back a little bit prior to 2010. And the act at that time required that dealers make disclosure of any material fact that would deceive or tend to deceive the public. And probably for 20 years prior to that, the biggest single question asked by dealers to either the ministry or UCDA was, what's a material fact? Or is this a material fact? Is that a material fact? And when we sat down and developed the specific 21 disclosures that are required now, we did that for two purposes. One, obviously to make disclosure under the Act so that you could tell the customer the car, things about the car, its history, its maintenance, the rest of it. But the other one, and this is the one that disturbs me a lot, is that the industry helped develop these so that we could finally, once and for all, hold the customer responsible for the car they're trading in. Where did they get it? What have they done to it? How have they maintained it? What's not working on the car? And if we do that, we'll buy the car right so we can sell it right. The disclosures then, coining a phrase that's out there, will take care of themselves because you will determine whether it's water damage, fire damage. So to me, the old days of making verbal statements about cars no longer flies. They are 21 specific things you need to find out of a car when you appraise it or you get it from another dealer, because you still have to inspect the cars and then make those disclosures, whether it's retail or wholesale, and keep the chain going until the car's, if it was accident damage to the first owner, then that will be with the car through all of the transfers that takes place until the car's scrapped. And so that was why I think it's probably the biggest and most important change that took place when we did the Act.
And I agree with you, Bob. It's about transparency, and it's about, as you said, being able to buy the vehicle right so that you can sell it right. As long as everybody knows the true history or condition of that vehicle, that's what's it about. And that's going to build confidence in the registered dealer community.
And it is. And I said in our alert last night about the webinar, we struggle with this, and I'm not sure why we have. It should make perfect sense that if you're paying $15,000 for a trade-in, that you want to find out where it's come from, what's wrong with it, what kind of recon I'm going to have to do on it, if it's an out-of-province vehicle out of the U.S., damaged or whatever. So I'm just surprised the industry has been struggling this for so long.
So before we begin, pop quiz. You didn't know there was going to be a pop quiz today, but Farah's got one for you.
Okay, so audience, what do you think are the 3 most common disclosure issues on retail contracts when selling a motor vehicle to consumers?
Bob?
Well, the first one has to be daily rentals. And a little side pop quiz for you. The requirement for disclosing daily rentals, was it 2010, 2002 when the act was written, or 1989? I'll be interested in what your thought processes are on that.
I already know the question, so it's 89.
It is. It's been a requirement for a long time in the industry to disclose daily rentals.
And Farah, what would be the next most common issue that OMVIC sees with disclosure non-compliance?
The next most common issue would be accident repair history over or under $3,000 damage disclosures not being identified on the bill of sale when retailed to a consumer.
And again, just sort of weighing in on that one, it has been very difficult to get the whole story on accident damage. The reports don't contain all damage. An awful lot of people get their cars fixed by themselves. Daily rentals don't always get on these reports for accident damage. So it's not something over or under, that it really requires the inspection of the car and going over it carefully and whatever the customer is going to say, if they're going to tell us the truth.
And I think that's a really important point, that it's not just a vehicle history report.
Right.
It is that extra due diligence that you're talking about, inspecting the car, putting a paint meter to it, those types of things.
Right.
And the last one?
The last one would be out-of-province non-disclosure. So if a vehicle has been registered in a province that is not Ontario, this must be clearly and prominently disclosed on the bill of sale.
And as you can see from the pictures there in the New Jersey plate, these are cars from Superstorm Sandy from 2-3 years ago, I guess. That hurricane was. I mean, there was 250,000 vehicles in the New Jersey area that were destroyed. Many of those vehicles found their way back onto the road. So it would be, if I was going to buy a car, I'd perhaps want to know that car was once registered in New Jersey.
But again, I take it back to why we wrote it in, and that was because of 2005 and Hurricane Katrina, and there were 600,000 cars there. Yeah. And to be honest, I've only ever seen one bona fide water damaged Hurricane Katrina car in Canada. I've only seen one. Now, I suspect there's more, but it was so much easier to sell them in California and Texas than bring them across an international boundary. So I don't know that we had that big a problem, because we have enough of our own flood damaged, water damaged cars here in Ontario.
Exactly. And just to put it out there, simply stating previous U.S. vehicle, going back to our sandstorms here, you want to be particular as to which jurisdiction the vehicle has come from. So if it's from the United States, you want to state what state the vehicle has been registered in. So you've heard me say clearly, prominently disclose on a contract. What does clearly and prominently mean? We refer to it as CCP, clear, comprehensible, and prominent. So when you're providing disclosures on a contract, you want to make sure that these disclosures are clear, comprehensible, and prominent. If, for example, the vehicle is a former daily rental, suggesting that the vehicle is a DR, for example, is not considered to be clear, comprehensible, and prominent. You want to be specific to say this vehicle was a previous daily rental.
So the disclosure on this contract that just says discount.
It looks like the consumer got a discount on the vehicle.
But it was actually a discount daily rental. So that is not CCP.
And again, that's been required for a lot longer than just the last 5 years of the Motor Vehicle Dealers Act. So it's something we should not have a problem with today.
Exactly. Something that we commonly see being disclosed is customer has received a car proof report and is aware of the vehicle history and previous province/country of origin. This, again, not considered to be clear, comprehensible, and prominent. You want to specifically state the jurisdiction on the contract.
Prior use disclosure of vehicles, again, a lot of these would seem to be pretty obvious. Taxis and limos, I mean, just because it doesn't have the taxi sign on it, it's probably going to be a few years old with about 800,000 kilometers on it. So I think it's going to be very difficult for someone to say they didn't know. Same thing goes with police cruisers or emergency services vehicles. they'll be sold at auction without the decals or the roof racks and things on them. But again, it's pretty obvious. You've got the, again, daily rental, unless it's been owned by someone other than a dealer. And that's important because even now when I speak to our dealer groups, they don't realize that if a car is sold as a daily rental to the first customer and that customer drives it for 3 years, when they trade it in, the customer doesn't have to make disclosure to you, and you don't have to make disclosure down the line, I suppose, unless somebody says, Terry, I don't ever want to have had a daily rental, in which case the customer's made a disclosure, and you're probably going to have to look it up or try and find the answer to the question.
Yeah.
Exactly. And note the skull and crossbones that you see displayed on this particular slide. The skull and crossbone indicates that these items are rescindable items if not disclosed to the customer on the bill of sale, meaning that it triggers an automatic rescission if not disclosed. So pay particular attention to the skull and crossbones.
The $3,000 damage one, that again is the one that still causes an awful lot of confusion in the industry. And more often than not, I hear people saying, well, if it's under $3,000, I don't have to disclose it, and that's not true. The Act was written so that if you didn't run any reports and just inspected the car and saw 2 panels have been changed, the door and a quarter panel have been changed, if you couldn't find any other information out but you believed it was over $3,000, then you would make that disclosure to the customer. And it goes on to say if you do know a number of the repair, then that must be disclosed as well. But again, that number's not that easy to find all the time. So it really comes down to, what do you know? How'd you inspect it? And then did you make a determination over 3,000? Under 3,000, the Act didn't say, well, if it's under 3,000, you can mislead the customer or not tell them the truth. If you know it was involved in an accident and it was $2,800 or $2,000, then chances are you're going to have to disclose it as well. So
there's a very good chance that that's going to be material to the customer. If the car had a $1,000 hit on it and the customer said, has it ever been involved in a collision? Have to disclose it?
Well, you'd have to, yes, because you can't lie to the customer.
That's right.
So yes, I suppose you would have to do that. Again, very difficult to find out what kind of damage was done. Some windshields can be $1,000 and show up on some of these reports.
Well, that's true. And I think that's what we're talking about on this slide is that the vehicle history reports, I mean, they're amazing tools. Mm-hmm. They're valuable, but they're not perfect.
They're not. And we released in our last dealer magazine, and it's an article that I wrote, and it clearly shows that out of the 21 mandatory disclosures, there's only 5 of them that will show up with any real consistency on any of the reports. The rest of them are the best information the insurance industry can provide or the Ministry of Transport can provide, but it's not accurate and it's not reliable. It still requires what we had to do when I sold cars in the 70s in Thunder Bay, get out and look at a car and inspect it and find out what's happened to it.
Disclosure is also required if there is structural damage to the vehicle, if there's fire damage or flood damage, liquid penetration, or if the vehicle has 2 or more adjacent panels that are not bumper-to-bumper panels that have been replaced. All of these things must be disclosed on the bill of sale to the customer. Also, if it's been branded by MTO as salvage, rebuilt, or irreparable.
Well, and if it's declared a total loss, and again, a lot of misunderstanding out there that every total loss is going to be branded, and it's not. The vast majority would be what I classify economic total losses. It's just too expensive to fix the car, but it wasn't structurally damaged enough. So there are 2 separate disclosures. One is the brand that's put on by the insurance industry, and then subsequently on the registration in the top left corner. And then another one where you see an accident that was $10,000 or $15,000, the car's not branded. You have to go and find out, was it declared a total loss? Is there an insurance company in the history just after a consumer, which would tell you then they've deemed it a total loss.
If the vehicle's anti-lock brakes are not operational, this must be disclosed on the contract. Also, if the vehicle's airbags are missing and or don't function. Keep in mind that vehicles can still be sold and pass a safety if these disclosures are made. So you do have to be very particular in providing the disclosures accurately on the contract.
I think that that's an important point, because a lot of consumers, they do not understand exactly what a safety, the certification represents. They
Yes.
think that means the car's got no defects. I mean, some think it means comes with a 36-day warranty.
Yeah.
And of course, we all know that is not the case. A vehicle will pass a safety and can be sold without airbags. But if that is the true state of that vehicle, it must be disclosed.
Well,
on the bill of sale.
I think anybody would have to agree that selling a car without airbags, if they did have them originally, would be a material fact that you'd want to know. Certainly want to know it just before the accident, anyway, because they aren't going to work. The other big disclosure to me, and one of the main reasons I think we really bought into the specific disclosures, is this question: does the vehicle require repairs? And there's about 10 subheadings there: engine, transmission, powertrain. And again, it's the first opportunity that the industry has had to actually hold the customer responsible for their mechanical condition of the car. And you're not going to find the answer to these on any report. This requires you to go out and take a look at the car and detail what's wrong with it. If you can't fix it, or you don't choose to fix it, like air conditioning, for example, it's an older car, you don't want to do the $2,000 repair in the air conditioning, then it's simply disclosure it's not working. But you have to find out it's not working in the first place. So that's the big question to me that I use when I go and take a look at the appraisal processes.
And I think that that's an important point too, Bob, because what you're talking about is most of these disclosures actually require the dealership to have a process in place to identify them and then disclose them.
When I speak and publicly, I say that whether we do this now or we do this 5 years from now, the cost of these repairs with the hybrid and high-tech parts are going to force the industry to do this, because it's not going to be an $800 repair. It's going to be a $3,000 repair to some of the high-tech or hybrid parts that are in these cars. So it's something that we really have to start paying attention to, is what kind of mechanical condition are we bringing these cars in? And a better inspection.
There's also a lot of confusion, because these particular components aren't required on wholesale disclosures. So when you're wholesaling a motor vehicle, this is one of the components that is not required to be disclosed when you're wholesaling to another dealer, rather only when you're retailing motor vehicles.
Right.
Going back to the Hurricane Sandy example, if the vehicle was registered outside of the province of Ontario within the last 7 years, you must state this on the contract and have it acknowledged by the consumer. Also, if the vehicle was ever stolen and or recovered.
Odometers, again, one of the ones, and actually this one doesn't have the skull and crossbones beside it. It probably should.
It does.
Oh, it does? I haven't got it on mine. Under the distance traveled. So
we got to clean your bifocal.
Oh, there. Okay, there it is.
There
okay, I didn't see it. All right. We're going to talk about odometers a lot today, and my concern with a lot of the dealers when they're doing this, the contract date is important, and the car's odometer reading on that date is the one that must be on the bill of sale. And we've had way too many issues with the car's been entered into a DMS a couple of months earlier, and that number will show up on the contract date when the car is being sold to a Terry O'Keefe, for example, and they can be thousands of kilometers out, or hundreds anyways. And so that the contracts must reflect the true distance traveled on the date of the contract. And again, you do a contract on a Saturday, you're taking delivery the next Saturday. If they do another contract, that odometer reading, depending on what's happened with the car in that week, should be obtained from the car again.
So somebody has to actually walk out and check the odometer and then re-enter that information.
Yeah, right.
So what happens when the mileage is unknown? How are you supposed to disclose this on the contract? So if it's possible, you need to provide the last reported mileage on a given date, as well as a statement that the actual number of kilometers is higher. Or if the past mileage or date is not known, declare that the total distance that the vehicle has been driven is unknown and may be substantially higher than the reading on the odometer. TKU will not suffice. This is a rescindable item. You do not want to use abbreviations. You have to use these particular statements as they're demonstrated on the slide.
And these statements, as far as said, you have to use them verbatim. They're available on our website. I know that the UCDA has them on a number of their documents as well.
Yep.
And it's really important that those old terms, true mileage unknown, true kilometers unknown, or the the TMU, TKU, never be used. That is simply not allowed anymore. You must use these statements.
We're actually running in two situations this week at the UCDA where the customer has one totally misrepresented the odometer, and it had been repaired, and he had represented around 90,000 kilometers, really around 240. So I think an inspection of the vehicle would have shown it was a little more tired than a $90,000 or 90,000 kilometer car. The other one was someone who's actually spun his odometer, and so this is an issue. We don't see a lot of it. We're seeing more of it now. We're trying to get our industry to really start taking a look at the cars with the odometer readings. And it happens, and it's an expensive. If you filled out the appraisal form properly and you got your mileages probably done, it's easier to fight a case against the customer who has misrepresented the odometer at time of trade-in. Specific model information, again, the make, the model year. So what do we got? The model year of the car, obviously the make, the model of the car, and the trim level. And it's the trim level, again, that was once part of the rescission and was taken out because that's the most difficult one to find out. So you've got to spend a little extra time to make sure it is the model and the proper trim level when you're selling a car. It's still a disclosure requirement. It's just not rescindable.
Okay. And we did bump over one of the slides here, so we're just going to go back to it, and that is if a vehicle's not in stock and is going to be located,
yes,
the requirements for disclosing the mileage on that.
And that's another one it's on the new car side of the industry. Obviously, when you have to locate a car, or you don't know what the odometer is and you don't know what the VIN is because the car hasn't been built yet. So there is a section on the bill of sale that talks about maximum number of kilometers at time of delivery, and that's a number you have to negotiate with your customer to say, Terry, I'm going to drive your car back from Montreal. I've located it there. They've told me it's got 50 kilometers on it. I'm not really sure that's true. The car, when it gets here, is going to have no more than 750 kilometers on it. And if you initial that and the car comes in with 690, then I've met my requirement for the disclosure.
Yeah, it's very important to have the consumer acknowledge that, right?
Yeah.
For your protection
That's right.
as a retailer.
And that happens with even the newest vehicles that are built. They'll sometimes come in with 50 or 60 or 70 kilometers on them. I know BMW does a lot of testing of the vehicles before they release them, so they have kilometers on them. So it's something on the new car side we really have to pay attention to. Which one do we got here? This is on disclosure required if the vehicle's been modified. And again, that's one where certain cars are modified for making them go faster. Younger people might do that, but it's also for trucks when you're modifying frames, springs,
putting a lift kit
in it.
Yeah.
Or the fact that you put on an awful lot on the front so it was used as a snowplow, which would be a separate disclosure, or a trailer hitch, or a fifth wheel. So an awful lot is done to vehicles that will change their original manufacturer specifications, and then we go further on to, and the other one too is the manufacturer's warranty has been canceled. That's a telling disclosure, because even though the car might be out of warranty, if you could find out, and it's not easy to find out, that the warranty was canceled 2 years ago. Why did they cancel it? There's any number of reasons. It was a theft recovery. It was a damaged total loss vehicle, or stolen. So like I said, stolen. So there's a lot of things that would get a warranty canceled that would help you make other disclosures on the vehicle. So that one's pretty important. Or if the odometer's been broken or faulty or rolled back, and we've talked about that as well, to actually go and take a look at the cars to see, does this make sense more than anything else? There are that car out there that is 10 years old. It's only got 29,000 kilometers on it. That's true, but that's not the norm.
No.
So again, inspecting cars to see if there's a chance this odometer has been changed, or certainly questioning your customer on it.
And if the odometer is in miles, which is another required disclosure, there's a good chance that car's also come up from the U.S.
That's
and
right.
that's enough. That's going to trigger another required disclosure.
Right.
Buyer-specific disclosures. So if a buyer makes a specific request for information about a vehicle that they're interested in, you want to disclose that information on the contract and have the consumer initial their specifications. So for example, you've got a customer who has a child with a severe allergy to peanuts, and they ask you, has this vehicle ever had peanuts in it? Has anyone ever eaten peanuts in it? Or are there traces of nuts in this vehicle? that's something that's going to be hard to detect. You don't have a peanut meter like a paint
sniffer meter. We don't have one of those.
Unfortunately not. I mean, maybe a hound dog perhaps,
Maybe.
but I mean, that's a little excessive. If you're unable to find out that particular information about the vehicle, it's always good to disclose that that information is unknown, but the consumer did request that specific information. Just to protect yourself, have it acknowledged and initialed by the consumer if you're unaware upon selling that vehicle.
I think a more realistic, not realistic, but a real life one would be the daily rental, where somebody's had a daily rental in the past and doesn't want one.
Yep.
So you've got a car on the property, it's 3 years old. For the first 3 or 6 months of its life, it was a daily rental. Disclosure's not required unless I make it a required disclosure and say, listen, I don't ever want it if it's ever been one. Mm-hmm. Can we find that out for me?
Yeah.
Not always easy. You'd have to run a history and detect whether the rental car company's name is in the history. It's about the only way I know that you would find out if it's a daily rental. But that would be a more sort of out there, real world type request of a consumer. But there's more. I mean, even you go into the material facts one next for things that the customer, that you know, that you probably should tell them. And when I teach the class, I ask the people in the class, if you're buying a truck, would you want to know that for the first 3 years of its life, it was used as a snowplow? And across the industry, yes, of course, you would want to know that.
But it's not one of the name disclosures.
It's not.
But it would absolutely fall under the material fact requirement.
Right, or racing. And some people I know very close, they race their cars. They take them out to the track at Mossport and they do it, you know, in a safer environment, obviously. And then that would be a disclosure requirement if you knew. And again, the customer didn't always tell you on trade-in that I raced this thing at Mossport, but if you did, then that would be a disclosure you would make to the next customer. You'd have to.
Exactly. And another thing is, if you're buying a newly used vehicle, for example, and the warranty, the manufacturer's warranty has already started ticking, you want to disclose the balance of the warranty on the contract because it's already started. So the consumer isn't going to be able to have the clock ticking upon purchase of that vehicle.
And many of the new car dealers that are listening will recognize that sometimes that warranty will get triggered before if I can use the term, bona fide consumer or customer actually buys the car. Mm-hmm. That the vehicle's been registered to the dealer and it's sat on the lot for 2 months before it's actually sold to a customer. So because of that's how it happened, there's only 58 months perhaps left of that 60-month warranty. That is a material fact that must be disclosed on the bill of sale. And of course, something that Bob and I were talking about before we started is the recent requirement under the MAT FACT rules for outstanding safety recalls.
Right. And we're working on that to make that a little easier to find out, because once again, Canada has fallen way behind the U.S. in making that information available. Transport Canada has now said they're going to start doing something about it. So until then, you have to do the best job you can, and UCDA has put some things out there to help you deal with that, with the recall information. So,
question for you: can it be a material fact if the damage to the car is less than $3,000?
Sure.
Yes.
If anybody in this room, anybody listening, was buying, we'll say, a 2013 Corvette with $2,100 damage to the fiberglass body, would you want to know? You're paying $80,000 for the car. It's pretty obvious. Now, if it's a 2001 Honda Civic with 80,000 kilometers on it and it had $2,800 worth of damage 10 years ago, I'm not sure that falls into a material fact disclosure. So again, it's a little wiggle room, we call in the industry, where the dealer has to make a decision. Is this something that would change the buyer's mind on buying the car? Is this important to the deal, or is it really irrelevant because it's a 10-year-old car and it's still running well? Yeah. And it's all in what he thinks of what the buyer thinks.
You want to manage the consumer's expectations. So if the consumer is asking you if the vehicle has ever been damaged, or if it's ever been in an incident, or is there anything on a car proof report that suggests, let's say, perhaps an estimate that might be material to that consumer, you want to disclose this on the contract.
I think for me, probably one of the easiest examples would be a new car that might have been damaged on the dealer's lot, and it required $2,500 in repairs.
Mm-hmm. I'm working on one right now where it was actually a bumper replacement on a car that was in transit, and And again, bumpers are excluded under the disclosure requirements anyway, but it's a brand new car. So it's, again, one of those gray areas. Is it an excluded disclosure, or is it because it's a new car, it's not fresh right out of the box, damage free? And if you take a look at cars, new cars in the marketplace, they're transported halfway around the world. It's not unreasonable to think they might have got a ding or a bump in them someplace. And whether that's relevant or not is another question.
Yeah. I think most consumers, if I can buy that vehicle that still has the factory paint on it,
right,
versus one that's had to have $2,500 in repairs, and they're sitting parked next to each other on that new car dealer's lot, I'll take the one that's still got the factory paint, thank you.
Yeah.
So that would be a material fact to me, and I think to many consumers.
And I think just from what Farah said on this whole issue on the estimates themselves, and I know we were going to weigh into this a little bit, if that's all the information you had, it doesn't say enough, and that's a message to the industry that if that's the only information you've got, you got to go and take a look at the car and do a lot better job on it, because whether that's a disclosure or not, if it was an accident, as an estimate as result of an accident and the customer fixed it on the table, there's a few other disclosures you might have to make, like the damage exceeded $3,000, like there was frame damage or some other, two adjacent body panels changed.
Yeah.
So that type of stuff, well beyond whether it was estimated properly or not, and whether somebody estimates the repair at a number that has to be given, the dealer's estimate of that repair has to be given equal weight to that person's estimate of that repair. So it's a very gray area. I'm not sure that it's an absolute specific disclosure if that's all you've got.
But as you said, it very likely is going to trigger other required disclosures.
It's going to disclose other ones. So that's sort of an off the side. It just is good information to know. Go look at your car.
So I know this is one of Bob's favorite topics.
Oh.
I've heard Bob talk about this when he teaches the OMVIC certification course. Our disclosures, all these 21 or 22 with the matte pack disclosures that we've talked about, are they required? All of them required if you sell a car as is with the as is statement on the contract signed off.
No question. It's an answer that is yes for so many reasons. And my most recent best answer to that question is we spent almost 10 years writing the disclosure requirements to the retailer. And whether you're selling the car as is or without a safety or an e-test, which are two separate cars as they're defined, you have got to make the disclosures required under the Act. You can't wave your magic hand and say, those disclosures no longer apply because I'm selling it as is. And one of our dealers found out that selling a car to a person who made it known why they wanted to buy it and saying, yes, we've got this one and it's as is, cost the dealer a $4,000 engine job because they didn't disclose that the engine required repairs to her when she bought it. And she came back and said, 3 weeks into a deal, my $4,000 or $5,000 car is sitting with a blown engine. You never told me, and my mechanic has told you the head gasket was gone on the car long before you bought it. So all of the disclosures are required, and that's why when I wrote the article in our news magazine to say from the industry, if you're selling cars as is to the public, there's nothing in it for you. You've still got all of these liabilities. The word as is means nothing. The car has to fall under the definition of as is, which is coming up, I guess.
Actually, we're not going to
do that. Okay, good.
It'll be right on the bills of sale.
Exactly.
But you alluded earlier, Bob, to rescission.
Right.
That there are, there's those 22 required disclosures, and there's what we refer to the six deadly sins.
Right.
That's 6 of them that if you don't get right, automatically triggers
cancellation. And cancellation in its most pure form is you will put the consumer back in a position as if the deal never happened. So you're going to unwind warranties, rust proofing, anything else you put on it, over allowances. The consumer, if you do not make one of these 6 disclosures, absolutely, within 90 days of buying the car, they can return it and they get a check for every dime.
Yep.
And the 6 are?
The 6 deadly sins. What are they? Previous use, taxi limo.
Right.
Right. We've got if the vehicle was previously used as a police or emergency service vehicle. If the vehicle was previously used as a daily rental,
and
one
again,
of my favorites.
The most common non-disclosure is daily rental. And the implication of that is a lot of money when you got to take these cars back in again.
The make, model, model year of the vehicle.
Right.
These must all be disclosed accurately, otherwise it could be grounds for rescission.
Right.
Again, we've got if the vehicle has been branded, irreparable, salvaged, or rebuilt, and how it was last classified.
And the actual distance traveled on the vehicle and the tolerance for that. And I actually, in the class, I don't teach the tolerance. I'd really just like us to just get up and get the real numbers off the car and put them on the contracts instead of relying on the DMSs or something else or another piece of paper. The tolerance isn't very much at 5% or 1,000.
Whichever is less.
And I know one of our used car managers is listening today because we were chatting about it, and he found out just how expensive that was going to be when he sold a convertible BMW with 1,600 kilometers difference, and the customer drove it all summer and brought it back 86 days later and got every dime back. And absolutely within the 90 days, no appeal to this section of the Act, he got every dime back.
I often get questions from dealers saying, but Farah, I thought that in Ontario there is no cooling off period. Once a deal is signed, that's the consumers. It's the consumers, and there's no cooling off period. But these 6 particular items must be disclosed accurately, otherwise it does cause grounds for
and it's black and white.
And everybody in this room and everybody listening has got to understand, if you bought a car and it had any one of those, what would they want to see happen? You found out that you bought a car and it was a previous daily rental. That was never told to you, or it had mileage a lot more, or it was branded. Is there anybody out there that would say, no, that's okay, it's all right, I'll just drive the car having paid the money they paid for it? So when we pick these 6, and I'd like to see quickly or soon go over this list again and take some stuff and add a little bit to this one, especially on the branding, and that would be the declared total loss as well.
Well, we just got a question, and I think that's a really valuable insight, Bob. We just got a question from one of the people listening to the webinar who asked, is Uber a taxi?
Yeah, it's a curbside taxi. Curbside taxi cab company.
It's used as a shuttle service. It's used to courier individuals from point A to point B. So I would say yes, it is a taxi.
And I haven't looked at the definition for a while of a public vehicle for hire taxi defined under the Highway Traffic Act, but I think it fits squarely under that. And I guess we're going to find out. This is going to be a court case. I don't know whether you saw in the news last week, actually an Uber car hit a taxi. So now it's going to be in the insurance world, and it's going to be pretty obvious what happens, or we're going to look to see what happens as a result of who's going to pay the damages and the bodily injury and the accident benefits. An Uber hit a taxi. And quite frankly, you hired the car. It's taxi.
Yep. And keep in mind that if you are taking a vehicle in on trade, for example, and you're completing the trade-in appraisal form, that's a good question to ask the consumer. If they say that the vehicle's never been used as a taxi or limo, you might want to dig in a little deeper and ask them if they use that vehicle as an Uber vehicle. So under the Motor Vehicle Dealers Act, failure to make any of those 6 disclosures that we just attended to, even if the dealer was unaware, triggers the purchaser's right to rescind the deal within 90 days of delivery. Rescission also cancels any other agreement under the contract, such as extended warranties, financing, etc. Dealers may not charge for usage when a contract is rescinded, okay? And this is not just reflected under the Motor Vehicle Dealers Act, but the Consumer Protections Act as well. Consumers have up to 1 year to request rescission if a dealer commits an unfair business practice under the Consumer Protections Act.
But again, the last point is different than the 90-day.
It is.
It is.
The one they can request rescission, the other one they get rescission.
Exactly.
And that's cancellation.
Sometimes, I mean, if the consumer discovered they bought a car with a rollback odometer, let's say, and they didn't find out for 6 months, they don't get automatic rescission granted under the MVDA, but I would suggest that a dealer would be very wise to try to work something out with that consumer. Otherwise, it might be a court ordering the rescission under the CPA.
What about the trade-in? So let's say a rescinded deal, it falls on your plate. What happens if a trade-in has been involved? Dealer isn't required to return the vehicle that's been traded in, but the dealer must refund the amount paid for that vehicle or the amount of the credit allowed for the trade-in on the contract. Okay, so note that if the contract is inflated for negative equity purposes, for example, by $3,000, you've got to honor that if that's how the contract reads.
So it's really important that you reflect negative equity on the contract to protect yourself from this.
Mm-hmm.
It's really important.
The next one we're going to talk about, I guess, is disclosure. It's not just good for consumers. Again, we go back to why the disclosure laws were written, and it was to clearly make it clear that when something happens to a car, that it stays with the car from a consumer to a dealer to a dealer to a dealer to another consumer, that the chain isn't broken. So it is the law. It's covered under the Code of Ethics, which normally the Act doesn't speak to business transactions except under the Code of Ethics. So that's where this requirement is. Our wholesale bills of sale have the 20 disclosures on the bottom, and we need to start paying attention to that, because if a car, say, is accident damage $10,000, and you tell it to the next customer, they don't tell the next dealer, they find out, but the wholesale side of the business doesn't pay attention to this, it's going to come back to the offending dealer that didn't make the disclosure, plus some other costs involved likely anyway. So the dealer to consumer, dealer to dealer, and the only one that's not required is that accident or the repairs required.
Exactly.
So it is a law for the dealer to dealer disclosures.
And that's exactly what we're talking about, wholesale. The Code of Ethics has the requirements for wholesale disclosures, and they are nearly identical to consumers.
Yeah, it's just
they are identical. They're exactly
with one exception.
and that exception is the major component, repairs. Right?
That's right. Now, don't forget that if you're running through the auctions, that major component repair isn't required by the Act, wholesale to wholesale, but the NAAA rules certainly make it an arbitratable issue. So that's their rules. So the dealers are sort of caught between a rock and a hard place on that one. If the car's going through the auction, then you have to disclose if you know damage exceeds $750. So that is something on the auction side that will show up on the disclosure statements or the bills of sale from the auctions.
So what we have here is a wholesale contract, and this is the type of thing, Farah, that when you do inspections, you love to see wholesale disclosures provided like this.
I love it when they're clear, comprehensible, and prominent, Terry. I mean, it allows you to suggest if the vehicle was a daily rental, okay? So you want to tick that off if it's yes. If the vehicle was a former daily rental, you want to add that in the details section of the wholesale contract. Vehicle is a former daily rental. What I see often in the field is, for example, some might say discount, right? To a wholesaler, they might understand that it's a vehicle purchased from discount. To a consumer, right, they don't understand that. So you want to be transparent when you're making disclosures on the wholesale level in general.
And again, if you've ticked off the box and somebody did put enterprise in the dealer side, we know what that means, because it says daily rental and the box is ticked. So again, whether they go to vehicles for me daily rental or boldly daily rental or Hertz daily rental or whatever they want to put on it, it just adds one more sort of, for sure, I told you it was one.
Exactly.
Yeah, and I think what Farah is suggesting here is this is a best practice, because I know from speaking with our inspection staff, very often the disclosure that is written on the wholesale bill of sale gets translated verbatim on the retail bill of sale. And while everyone who's listening understands what those terms might mean, to a customer they might not. So it's important to understand the difference.
Exactly, and it's also important to see at the top of this example here, mandatory disclosure statement as required by MVDA 2002. It's right there, prominently disclosed that all this information is important according to this piece of legislation.
The auction disclosures, again, and it's important then you understand that you're not buying a car from the auction. You're buying it through the auction process from another dealer. So, and you got to be careful, because if that dealer failed to make a disclosure and didn't tell the auction, then it's not going to appear on the bill of sale. So my advice to our industry is always, when you get these cars back from the auction, go over them to make sure what disclosures you have, document them properly inside in your own paperwork to make sure they do get disclosed when the cars are sold retail. But many disclosures are missed at the auction.
So you want to maintain your due diligence. You want to, do your inspections like Bob suggested. You want to pull your history reports. You want to make sure that the disclosures that were provided to you are accurate as well.
So obviously buying cars at an auction, one of the major ways dealers get inventory, and if wholesale disclosures are being made there, that's great, because that'll allow the dealer to make retail disclosures to their customers. But the other big source of inventory, of course, for dealers is trade-ins.
Exactly.
And this is a requirement under the Act as well.
So when dealers take a vehicle in on trade, there are specific details to collect and record. When they resell the vehicle, they can provide that adequate disclosure. So you want to make sure that you are fulfilling your trade-in requirements when you are taking a vehicle in on trade. You want to go through the questionnaire with the consumer. You want to do your physical inspection of the vehicle so you don't fall short and, you know, end up getting the short end of the stick at the end of the day.
And again, when we designed the form you're seeing right now, actually there's a new one with a hybrid section, and I don't know if it's there or not, but we should probably update the slide. But as we go further in this, more and more of the hybrids come off the through the trade-in process. This is going to get more and more important. There are a lot more than 21 disclosures on that piece of paper. There's a lot of information on there that's going to help you really determine the value of the car based on a lot of other things. Now the 21 mandatory are there, and taking the time to do it and complete it and getting the customer to sign it. True fact, one of the best ones we've had where the dealer won on an issue on that form because he filled it out completely. If he didn't fill it out, we couldn't have helped him fight his battle and win. And so it's very important that the inspection of the car, the history reports, and whatever the customer is going to tell you, whether they tell us the truth or not, is documented.
And one of the important questions there, you said one of the first ones too when we were talking before we started, is are you the original owner of the car?
Right.
Because if they're not, there may be things wrong with this car. It may have been involved in collisions or whatever that they know nothing about.
Well, if somebody's owned the car, it's a 4-year-old car, they owned it for 2, they can only speak to the 2 years they've owned it, even if they recall what was disclosed to them that might be on the bill of sale, that might be in some file cabinet back at home. When they're trading it, they might not always know that or recall that information. So yeah, it's an important part of this whole process.
So just going to let Farah take us through here. What can happen if a dealer fails to make proper disclosures, other than, of course, rescission for the customer, but for breaching the Act or the Code of Ethics? What are the possible ramifications?
So there are many ramifications, and you got to keep in mind that you might not fall under some of these categories depending on your class of registration, for example, depending on your history within the market. But you could receive a caution letter, for example, if you're not in compliance with a portion of the Act. You could be faced with a notice of complaint, which triggers the disciplinary process, or charges could be laid, or you could receive a proposal to revoke a dealer and or a salesperson's license. So what are some penalties and fines that you're looking at if you're not in compliance? So if you receive a notice of complaint, which, like I said, triggers the disciplinary process, you could receive a fine of up to $25,000 per party named on the notice of complaint. Okay, so not $25,000 per notice, but $25,000 per named party on each notice. You could also receive charges through the provincial offenses. An individual can get fined up to $50,000 and or 2 years less a day imprisonment, and a dealership can get fined up to $250,000 rather.
I think it's worth pointing out too that the notice of complaint and a discipline hearing, that is what is triggered for breaches or alleged breaches of the Code of Ethics, which is of course where all the wholesale disclosure requirements are that you talked about.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and again, the average fines right now, first offense, are probably somewhere between $7,000, I think you'll agree, $7,000 and $15,000, and they're only going to go up from there if the processes aren't put in place in the dealerships. So some fines we've seen are pretty heavy against dealers who didn't think they had done much wrong when they're clearly in violation of the legislation.
So far, what are the 2 most common reasons that a dealership finds itself going through the discipline process?
I mean, what I've seen trending over the last couple of years would be non-compliant advertising, so not being complying with your daily rental disclosures in advertising, for example, or all-in pricing, which is a big one. We just did a webinar with regards to all-in pricing a couple months back with Bob, and non-disclosure on contracts. So again, you're out of province, your daily rental, your accident repair histories, and material facts not being disclosed on your contract.
And on this slide, you'll notice it says, note, all discipline decisions must be made public. sometimes we hear from dealers and they think, well, that's just OMVIC being heavy-handed, that we're all these discipline decisions that a dealer's been found of breach of the code of ethics, that it's right there on our website, it's searchable. That's not the case. OMVIC is actually required by the Motor Vehicle Dealers Act to make this information public. We must.
So we're required to disclose this to you. You're required to disclose, disclosures to consumers. We're all required to disclose something here.
Yeah. And I like the non-disclosure part on the contracts as your second one next to advertising. And if I read the disclosures, the most common one, apart from any other non-disclosure issue that's in the notice of complaint, is daily rentals.
Yeah.
And again, I find that odd when the dealer selling the daily rental bought it as a daily rental and they haven't got the processes in place to make that disclosure clear. And I think one of the processes we developed at the UCDA is a checklist at time before delivery, where a manager has to approve the delivery to make sure these disclosures are on. If they're in the deal jacket, if they're on the disclosure statement when the car was bought from auction or whether it's daily, that those are clearly on the contract when it goes out. And it's amazing that almost half of the disciplinary charges include daily rental non-disclosure.
And you raise a really important point there too, Bob, and you talk about having processes in place. I know that I've given this disclosure seminar to dealers, at their stores, and very often when we talk about the wholesale disclosures, the dealer principal or the general manager will look at the person in charge of wholesaling and go, so we're making all these wholesale disclosures to whatever dealership we're selling these cars to, and the answer invariably is no. And then of course the inquiry is made, well, why not? And the wholesaler says, well, I never see the deal jacket, so I don't see the trade-in disclosure statement, so I don't know about them. And it's a simple failure of having a process in place at the store to make sure these disclosures are made.
Whether it's being sold retail or wholesale, the people selling it get access to the information in the deal jackets that would require this. And that should not be that difficult to put in place in the dealerships. We've in a lot of the dealers that we've helped with the notice of disciplinary, they've implemented this requirement that somebody signs off delivery before it goes to the customer. Then these disclosures are on the bill of sale. And they don't seem to have a problem with bringing that process in place.
So just to summarize,
the Motor Vehicle Dealers Act sets out specific details that must be disclosed in writing, that a dealer must disclose written on the contract, initialed and acknowledged by the consumers. The disclosures must be made clearly and prominently, again, acknowledged by the consumer, and disclosures must be provided within a timely manner. So before the contract is reviewed and signed, sealed, and delivered.
Mm-hmm. And again, on your last point on the failure to make specific disclosures triggers the rescission, the two most common that are in police vehicles, taxis, is the odometer reading and daily rentals. If we could fix those two problems, we'd fix a lot of problems in the industry as far as disciplinary hearings.
I agree.
Make those two disclosures absolute on the contract, we'd have a lot easier time with this process. Failing to make the appropriate disclosures can result in cancellation of the sale, administrative actions, and legal requirements to have a completed trade-in disclosure statement. You can be charged for not doing one. So it is a requirement. It's not a nice thing to do. It's required.
Exactly. And going back to those 6 deadly sins, the Motor Vehicle Dealers Act gives customers a legal right to cancel contracts should the dealer fail to make certain disclosures. Customers are entitled to rescission and have up to 90 days upon receiving their vehicle, and it cancels any other agreements under that contract. And under the Consumer Protections Act, so not to be confused with the Motor Vehicle Dealers Act, yet another piece of consumer protection legislation, consumers may have further rescission rights up to a period of 12 months under this particular act.
And on the wholesale summary, a code of ethics requirement, same disclosures retail are made dealer to dealer, except for the requirement for the repairs. And filling out that paperwork, and those that are listening right now, you can test it yourselves. When you finish the seminar, go pull a few wholesale bills of sale and see how many times these disclosures are really made. And take a look at the process in the store to see where did I miss not putting that disclosure on the wholesale bill of sale. The wholesale cars are generally the older ones. There's a higher propensity to have a disclosure on them. So just do your own audit on the wholesale side, certainly before OMVIC comes in and does your audit.
And resources, we're here to help. Our website, new and improved and user-friendly. I love it. If you go onto our website, www.omvic.on.ca, if you click on MVDA requirements, you can get information regarding disclosures and the disclosure requirements. Also, if you click on news and publications, all information with regards to the dealer bulletins that we send out, our dealer standard publications that is sent out quarterly, our TNT publication as well, and news releases. You'll find all updated information, anything that we believe should be important to you as a dealer. It is on our website. So, and you can use our search engine as well on our website. I know I use it all the time. So if you're having some difficulties maneuvering around our website, the search engine is always a good tool to use. And again, if you have any questions, comments, you can contact OMVIC's Complaints and Inquiries team at 800-943-6002, extension 5105, or you can email us at omvic@omvic.on.ca, or
you can call the UCDA. I mean, if you don't feel sort of comfortable making the call to the regulator, and you have to appreciate some might not feel that comfortable doing it.
We come in peace.
Myself, Jim Hamilton, Warren, we've been around a long time in this business, and we can get you the information, the answers, and help you solve your problems.
I asked Bob for his personal cell phone number to put up on the slide there, and he didn't want to give it to me.
I don't see yours, Terry. Anyway.
Now, I want to thank both Bob and Farah for participating today. That was wonderful. I want to thank all the dealers and salespeople listening. I know that we're coming up to the hour mark, which is what we hoped we would end, but we've got a few questions here that we want to try and address. And as we said, if there are other specific questions that you've sent, if we don't tackle it right now, we will have staff here at OMVIC.
This is like the final Jeopardy round.
That's it. This is
let's see what we got.
So this is an interesting one. It's straight to the point. Why are retail customers allowed to lie to us when they're trading in the vehicle without consequence?
They're not. And there are consequences if you do your paperwork properly. If you get their name on a piece of paper that's dated, who appraised the car, get their answers, know when the answer was yes, we can help you with that. And again, it's the first time the industry's had an opportunity when we passed the regs. That was a big part of making this regulation, this regulation into the Act, was we can hold the customer responsible, but it's up to you to do the paperwork.
And you were telling us last week, Bob, that about a customer who had rolled back the odometer on their vehicle. Yeah. They actually admitted to it after it was discovered. What was the outcome of that?
He had to return about $10,000 to the dealer, and he had no choice. They had good service records on the car that the customer had signed, and they had an appraisal sheet that he signed with the false statement on the odometer reading, which was about half what it should have been. It was on a leased vehicle, and a lot of people get into their leases, put more mileage on them, and they think this is they're out, and it's not.
Well, and also keep in mind that if you fall under that category where a consumer did not disclose some important facts to you upon trading in their vehicle, you can always give us a call, and we'll provide you with the best advice that we possibly can. Yeah. Unfortunately, the Motor Vehicle Dealers Act doesn't allow OMVIC representatives to represent the dealer in pursuing a consumer. You would have to do that civilly. And I believe that the consumer that you're referring to in the dealer, that was done civilly.
But paperwork that doesn't comply, unsigned, undated paperwork is no value in court, and we won't get involved unless the paperwork's done properly.
And as Farah points out, you know, OMVIC can't get involved in that type of thing.
And we have lots of ways to help our members when this happens.
Great. Another couple of questions, just asking for clarification on daily rental disclosure. So daily rental, previous daily rental use must be disclosed if it's the first person who's buying the car. So if Bob's discount rental car and Farah's a dealer and she buys the car from Bob at discount, and then she sells the car to me, a consumer, it must be disclosed. Now I trade that car in 3 years later to a different dealership.
Right.
That dealership no longer is required to make that disclosure.
Yeah. The use of the vehicle for 6 months as a daily rental 4 years ago is not relevant anymore. And that's when we wrote the regs. That's what we agreed on. What difference does it make? It's more the 3.5 years that Terry O'Keefe drove it. That's what we're interested in. What did he do with the car? this so that that daily rental doesn't have to be disclosed. And in real life, I bought a daily rental from a company that bought it from the rental company. So the disclosure was on my bill of sale, and I didn't have to remind them that it was a daily because it wasn't required to. Now, they knew it, but it doesn't matter. It does lose that disclosure.
Unless, of course, the consumer asked, was
Right.
there ever a daily rental?
Right.
And they're telling you then it's a material fact.
Right.
Exactly.
And the last question we're going to have time for is, what if a consumer doesn't disclose accident damage and the damage wasn't reported in an insurance company? It didn't show up on a history report when the vehicle was sold, and the car sold with no disclosure that the vehicle was in an accident, and then the purchaser discovers, lo and behold, it actually was. They've had it up on a hoist and they can show it. What happens?
That's why the inspections are very, very important. I mean, sometimes it could be the fact that an insurance, it didn't get administered through the insurance company quickly enough to come up on a part, or on a history report, for example. So you want to do the physical inspection of that vehicle if you cannot find any information on a history report.
That's right, and I guess an answer, really, part of that question was what happens when the customer traded in and didn't disclose it to the dealer and the dealer sold it. The dealer makes good to his customer because, or her customer, because that's the law requires, and then if the paperwork's good enough, we can help them go after the customer. But if the paperwork isn't good enough, then the game's over. The dealer's going to eat the loss.
And are you able to assist if they bought it wholesale from another dealer?
Sure. Yeah. Same rules apply. As long as the paperwork's right.
Any closing thoughts?
Just a great. I hope you enjoyed it. It's something really important to me on this whole disclosure, getting it right and getting the processes into place. So thank you for the invitation again. Always a pleasure.
And just be mindful that transparency is key when it comes to disclosures on contracts. OMVIC isn't just here for consumer protection. We're here to create an equal and fair marketplace amongst the dealer population as well. So if you have any questions or concerns with regards to the market, by all means, give us a call, email us, and we'll definitely attend to that at our earliest convenience.
And just in closing, I just want to reiterate, here's some information. If you do have questions for either the UCDA or OMVIC, as Farah said, we're here to help. We'd much rather you call, get your questions answered, and try to prevent problems from happening. So Bob, Farah, thank you very much for joining us. Everyone listening, thank you very much.
Thank you.